Sir Stephen Timms.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very pleased to follow the Right Honourable and learned member for South Swindon to congratulate him on securing this debate and on the report, which I think has made a very valuable contribution on this extremely important topic. I think the report does a very good job in laying bare the obstacles facing autistic people in the workplace, obstacles that we need, as he's rightly said, to overcome. And I applaud the obvious passion that the Right Honourable Member has shown in presenting the report to us. I didn't know about his own family link, and I'm grateful to him for explaining that to us as well. The Select Committee, Madam Deputy Speaker, has recently launched our own inquiry into disability employment. That's going to follow up the report we published in 2021 on the disability employment gap. We've just closed our call for evidence for that inquiry. I'm glad we've received evidence from Autistica, amongst others. And we're soon going to be starting to take oral evidence from disability charities and others. And the review, I think, will help us frame particular questions on autism employment in the context of that inquiry. As the review points out, the employment gap is much worse for autistic people than it is for disabled people more broadly. A disappointing feature of the report for me, though, is the rather unambitious nature of the recommendations. They're along the lines of the government ought to try a bit harder on this and do a bit more of that. There aren't any targets set out in the report, nothing to really help us to monitor progress. So I fear when the question is asked in 2 or 5 years' time, have these recommendations been delivered, then the answer is going to be a bit unclear. I don't blame the Right Honourable and learned gentleman for that. No doubt ministers would not have gone along with a higher level of ambition, but I fear the government will be able to accept all of these recommendations and not really change anything. That does seem to me a bit of a missed opportunity. The report highlights rightly the huge size of the autism employment gap. How much should we aim to reduce it by? Now, in his speech a moment ago, the Right Honourable Member suggested that the aim should be to increase the rate of employment amongst people with autism, at least up to the overall disability employment rate. Now, I think if that target had been in the report, that would have been a really substantial target to measure progress against, but it isn't in there as it stands. And my fear is that a kind of lack of ambition has regrettably marked the government's efforts on disability employment for some time. There was a moment not long ago when a higher level of ambition was announced. And members opposite may well remember that they campaigned in the 2015 general election campaign on a target announced by David Cameron to halve the wider disability employment gap. That disability employment gap fell sharply from 1998 to 2010 through the New Deal for disabled people, but it's been kind of stuck at around 30 percentage points ever since. It came down for a bit after 2015. I think, not surprisingly, perhaps in the pandemic it went back up. Unfortunately, however, that target of halving the gap was abandoned shortly after the 2015 election had been safely won. And that does strike me as the kind of move that gives politicians, unfortunately, a bad name. But our 2021 Select Committee report called unanimously on a cross-party basis for that target to be reinstated. So I do want this afternoon to make a call that in responding to this report, which does refer in paragraph 2.7 to making progress on closing the employment gap, the government should set an ambitious target for increasing the rate of employment among people with autism, perhaps, as the Right Honourable Gentleman has just suggested, up to at least the overall disability employment rate, because the Right Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right, as he spells out with passion in his foreword, that we are at the moment missing out on the skills and energy that autistic people could be contributing to the detriment of us all. He's absolutely right. And the danger, I fear, is that without targets against which to measure progress, the report may not really change things. Yeah.
Really grateful to him for engaging so closely. Can I give him some reassurance? I absolutely agree with him that without a means of accountability, then the work that we've done, I fear, will be lost. The task group, I think, will have a very important role and will have the freedom, I think, to start really developing some more hard and fast approaches where necessary and to hold government's feet to the fire of whatever complexion. I hope that gives him some reassurance.
Well, I'm grateful to him for that, and perhaps he could use his influence with the task group. I don't know whether he may be a member of the task group. I'm not sure how that's going to work out, but I'm sure he'll have influence with it. Perhaps he could urge them to adopt that target which he set out a few minutes ago, which I think really potentially could make a really substantial difference. I welcome the call in the report for, I quote, processes and support mechanisms that enable autistic staff to be recruited and to succeed. And in that context, I want to draw attention to a concept which isn't mentioned in the report. I was a bit disappointed that it wasn't, but one that has been referred to, and not least in our Select Committee report, and that's the concept of job carving, which means assessing a person's skills and then tailoring an employee role to those skills. So Catherine Hale, Director of the Chronic Illness Inclusion Project, told our 2021 inquiry that is particularly effective in supporting people with learning disabilities, and given the big overlap between autism and learning disability, I think job carving could certainly help. Mind, the charity, says that job carving roles for people with learning disabilities can benefit employers by removing tasks from other employees and freeing up time. The Equality and Human Rights Commission, in its report Working Better, described job carving as a flexible way of managing a workforce that could allow employers to utilise their staff skills in the most productive way, whilst enabling disabled people to make a valuable contribution to the world of work. So our report called on the government, as part of its then forthcoming National Disability Strategy, to provide detailed guidance to employers and providers of employment support on how they could job carve roles for disabled people, and on Job Centre Plus to encourage local employers in their area to job carve. The government's response to our report didn't pick up the concept of job carving, but ministers could still pick this up in responding to the report we're debating this afternoon. I wonder whether the minister, who I don't know takes a very close interest in this area, does recognise that job carving could make a really significant difference to the employment prospects of many autistic people. One thing the government response to our 2021 inquiry did refer to was the plan at that time to increase the number of places on the Intensive Personalised Employment Support Scheme, IPES, which is a programme providing voluntary employment support to people with disabilities and complex barriers to employment. As we noted in our report, the guidance to IPES providers does explicitly mention job carving as an intervention that can help disabled people find and stay in work. And IPES is referred to in paragraph 211 of the Right Honourable Gentleman's report. And his report points out, rightly, as we heard in our evidence session last week, in a one-off session on the government's Back to Work plan, but it is pointed out in the Right Honourable Gentleman's review, referrals to IPES have now ended. They're not going to be any more of them. The Work and Health Programme, also referred to in paragraph 211 of the report, is also coming to an end, we were told by the providers at our evidence session last week. So those are two programmes rightly identified in the report as providing very valuable help to people with autism to move into employment, are being shut down. And it doesn't appear, as far as I can tell, and the Minister may well want to comment on this in due course, but it doesn't appear that any of the newer employment support programmes like Work Well and Universal Support, which are being brought forward, it doesn't look to me as though any of them will provide support comparable to that which is at the moment being closed down, and which the report has rightly identified as very helpful. So the fear is that despite the very laudable aims set out in the report, which I know that the Minister is going to endorse, in reality we're going backwards. That provision that is there at the moment and has been there for some time is being removed. So it would be very helpful, I think, if the Minister could tell us why are IPES and the Work and Health Programme being closed? Where are the new initiatives to close what looks like an emerging gap in provision for people with autism? Employers are struggling at the moment to fill vacancies, and the Right Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right that there is a very big opportunity here to boost disability employment if we can just find a way to enable employers to tap into this opportunity. I think the Honourable Member for Worcester is absolutely right that employers are very willing to do so if only they knew how. And it's a bit of a closed book to them. There's no lack of willingness, I don't think, on the part of employers, but there is a lack of information. Very interesting, I thought, to read in the Right Honourable Member's review about Auticon, which I hadn't heard of before, an IT consultancy in which 80% of the workforce is autistic, highly talented IT consultants. The founders, I think they were in Scandinavia, recognised that many autistic adults have extraordinary abilities, pattern recognition, sustained concentration, attention to detail, qualities which are very valuable in many employment contexts, but autistic people need support to secure and maintain those jobs. And Auticon it specifically provides that, understanding the needs of its employees, it provides that support, and they built a successful business on the base of it. Yes, I'll gladly give way.
I'm very grateful to him giving way on that point, and I'm glad also that the report highlights the good work of GCHQ in this respect, which is a big employer in my neck of the woods. But I also just wanted to give him another example along those lines. There's a company in Worcester called Titania Security Systems, a cyber security company, where the chief executive is an autistic woman, and they have tailored their recruitment process specifically to address some of the challenges identified in my Right Honourable Friend's report, so that they can recruit more autistic employees because they find them such valuable and productive employees.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Member, because that sounds to me a wonderful model, and the more of that kind of initiative that we see around the country, the better. The report makes the point, I think, that a line manager in a mainstream business may well not know that somebody they are managing is autistic. Whether the employer can agree reasonable adjustments, as is their right under the Equality Act, will depend on them self-disclosing their diagnosis to their line manager. And as the review notes, whatever the level of understanding amongst company directors or senior staff, if the line manager is unable or unwilling to provide support, then the employee will struggle to stay in their job. The review is right to point out that there isn't at the moment any easily accessible guidance for employers and line managers on how to support autistic staff. Evidence so far to our inquiry suggests that employers, as the Honourable Member for Worcester has rightly said, want to do the right thing, but very often simply don't know how. And when they try it, and when they are pointed in the right direction, it turns out to be a very positive experience. What can the government do to give employers confidence in this area? The review calls on the department to continue to develop disability confident. I'm quoting from the continue to develop disability confident, increasing the rigour of developmental work needed to achieve the higher disability confident levels. I must say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think that's a very kind way of expressing the point. The noble Lord Shinquin, who sits on the government benches in the other place and chaired the Disability Commission for the Centre for Social Justice, he spoke for many of our witnesses when he said disability confident, quote, is not making a measurable impact at the moment. Employers can, as things stand, achieve the highest level of disability confident accreditation without employing a single disabled person. in responding to the predecessor Select Committee, the department said 6 years ago it was developing proposals for an evaluation of disability confident. That commitment, first expressed 6 years ago, was announced again in response to our report almost 3 years ago, in November 2021. But I must say I still haven't seen any sign of anything happening. Perhaps the Minister can update us. Is that evaluation of disability confident now complete? And when can we expect disability confident finally to be reformed? The review is absolutely right as well to highlight the importance of access to work and to call for improvements there. And it makes the point, and I think the Right Honourable Member referred to this in his speech, that almost 2/3 of disabled people stated that it took over 3 months for their application to be processed, 20% saying it took over 6 months. He's absolutely right, that is far too slow. And I agree that, as the review suggests, if the adjustment passport produces positive results, it should be rolled out nationally as soon as possible. But 3 years ago, we were promised, in response to our report in November 2021, that the adjustment passport would be piloted from November 2021, and then, if successful, expanded to support all access to work customers. So we seem to be, as far as I can tell, no further forward today in 2024 than we were in November 2021. When are these long-promised improvements actually going to materialise? One other policy lever the government could pull is mandatory disability workforce reporting, recommended unanimously on a cross-party basis in our 2021 report. There is a voluntary framework through which employers can choose to report, but in late 2021 the government launched a consultation on whether to require large employers to report the number of disabled people they were employing. That work was then paused. I understand it has now resumed, and that the government plans to publish its findings and next steps in the course of this year. I wonder if the Minister can update us on when we can expect to see that work. And does she agree that requiring employers to report on the number of disabled people they employ, and within that perhaps the number of autistic people, could be very effective in encouraging the employment of people with autism and other health impairments? So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I very much welcome this report and the opportunity to debate it today, and the way that it's highlighted very important issues. And I also welcome the approach, the very positive approach the Right Honourable Gentleman took in introducing the report earlier on, seeing the scale of the opportunity that we have here if we can get this right. But laudable aspirations in this area, with delivery delayed for years, are just not enough. We need, I think, an ambitious target to increase the rate of employment amongst people with autism and amongst other disabled people as well. And we need worked up plans and timescales to deliver them. And I do very much hope, perhaps as a result of the work of the task group that the Right Honourable Member has mentioned, that we will finally see some of that when the government responds formally to this very welcome